Hey, good morning, everyone. Josh's Severe Weather. Happy Tuesday morning to you. Things heating up in the tropics with a potential tropical cyclone that now has tropical storm watches and warnings for the Gulf Coast, and more potential trouble coming up the next couple of days. We're early in the season, but we're starting to see things come to life here pretty quickly. So I'm going to talk about that. I'll also take a look at some longer range tropical forecasting, and we're going to look at a little bit of severe weather and also heat across the northern portion of the country into eastern Canada. So thank you for joining me this morning. Here's a look at our three potential threats. The first one has been declared potential tropical cyclone 1. Not quite a tropical cyclone, still a bit too broad, but we do have tropical storm warnings for the lower Texas coast and watches for northeastern Mexico. And no matter whether or not this thing gets a name, I think it will, but we're struggling on that right now. We are going to see gusty winds moving into the coastal waters. We're going to see increased storm surge and a lot of heavy rainfall and potentially some significant flooding here in the next couple of days. You can see I've got this circulation here. This is all courtesy of the Central American gyre, which is common a couple times a year, typically the first time in June and then again later in the season. But we may not be done with this first system. In fact, models are now picking up, well, they have been, but now we're seeing more agreement, more forecasts that are showing a potential second system that may form here in just about 4 or 5 days and affect some of the same areas. At the same time, we've got a piece of energy that has dropped from a cold front and is expected to move quickly westward and develop here in the next couple of days. It'll be a pretty weak system, has a small chance of becoming something tropical and bringing an increase in moisture to the upper Florida coast into parts of the southeast here at the end of the week. That one is looking less confident than maybe a couple of days ago, but nonetheless, I'm going to track it until it falls apart or if it doesn't form at all. So here is a look from the Hurricane Center, and your eyes are not deceiving you. We've got a red X inside of a yellow area here. What that means is we've already got this one potential system, and then we've got potentially more development coming here over the next few days. Not so much today or tomorrow, but potentially as we get to Friday, Saturday, and Sunday over the Western Gulf, the exact same area. So kind of a carbon copy type system is what we're taking a look at here. The other area that I'm watching, chances have come down a little bit on this. I'm not as sold on it as I was a few days ago, but there's still an opportunity for some development here for a weak system to try to make its way up towards the Georgia-Florida line, maybe into South Carolina as well. The time frame on that is going to be Friday and very early on Saturday, and it's going to be out of here before the weekend. So ocean heat content remains very impressive for this time of the year, especially over the Caribbean Sea, which has pretty much been untouched, but across the Gulf as well, and into the deep tropics. And you can see here the white line is about the 0 degree line or the zero, I guess, kilojoules per square centimeter, and that's where we see things where everything north of this line is at or below the average ocean heat content for this time of the year, but everything down in here is running ahead of schedule and above average. And so it's bathwater, but it continues to heat up here over the tropics. So we are definitely heading towards a very active season, even though things right now are kind of sputtering, but I do think we are going to start to see things picking up here in the next few weeks, as you would expect this time of the year. So here's a deeper look at the tropics. And I'll circle some features for you. Here is our gyre right here, kind of tough to miss, but you can see things circulating. Here's our first piece. This is the potential tropical cyclone. Here is a disorganization on the Mexican Pacific side. And actually our most intense storms right now are well east of this center here over the Yucatan Peninsula. And that may actually be our next piece here for Friday and Saturday. The rest of the Atlantic really isn't super busy. We do have some flare-ups to talk about, but nothing that looks to organize. One east of Trinidad and Tobago. So we are going to see some heavier rain moving into the Windward Islands and adjacent South America. Here is our old front. You can kind of see it's getting hung up down in here. This tail end of it is where we're watching for development. It hasn't happened yet. We've seen very minor little circulations come out of it. The first one's actually going to be hitting into Florida today, not going to develop. But this is the main area here that we're going to watch in a few days, and it's going to follow this disturbance and eventually take aim at this part of the coast. But I don't think it's going to be developing too quickly. The rest of the tropics looking pretty good. The eastern Atlantic is quiet for the time being. Let me get this off the screen for you guys, and we're going to kind of take a look basin by basin here, or section by section. All right, this is our potential tropical cyclone, and it decided to reload the last image. That's all right. But just a very broad area where you see these streams of bands of showers and moisture heading northward towards Louisiana, Mississippi, and the upper Texas coast. You can see there's kind of a mid-level spin here just southeast of Texas, but the actual center is being shown down in here. Now we're going to have another aircraft moving into the or flying into the plane here this morning. That's going to get kind of some fixes to see if we still have multiple broader circulations or if we have a tightened up circulation. Until this circulation tightens up and everything is in kind of one spot, it is going to struggle to develop into a tropical system. Knowing what I know about the Gulf of Mexico and the shape of the Texas and Mexican coasts, what I personally suspect would happen is it's going to stay potentially a tropical system until maybe the 12 hours before it hits. And then once it gets into here, the convergence caused by the coastline will allow it to finally tighten up at the very last minute and make landfall as a tropical storm. That's what I personally think will happen, but things can go on either side of this where we can see it just not develop. There's about a 20% chance that still happens where we've got watches out for the tropical storm conditions for the heavy rain, but we don't actually get the actual tropical storm, although the average person's not going to know the difference. So that's what I personally think will happen. Even though everything is really broad in here, the heaviest storms are actually on the Caribbean side over Belize and the Yucatan. And then we've got these surges of moisture lifting northeastward. But a big disorganized system, one that you would commonly see in the monsoon trough across the Pacific or across the Indian Ocean. But to see something like this in the Gulf of Mexico is cause for concern, not because we're going to see something quickly form, but because we're going to see quite a bit of rainfall over a very warm, active basin here. Here's the rest of the Atlantic, and you can see most of the Caribbean pretty quiet right now. Here is a look at our gyre. You can see it very well here, and it's just kind of circulating, and it has adjusted a little bit more north and west, and it's going to kind of go back and forth here over the next week. Here's the base of our trough. You can kind of see this arc right in here. That's producing a lot of wind shear from the southwest to northeast over the Caribbean. That's unfavorable for tropical development, but it's not necessarily going to mean we're going to be just bright and sunny all day either. As you can see, storms flaring up here east of Honduras and Nicaragua. You can see significant rain that will finally make its way into Jamaica here. Not flooding, but more than what we've seen. And then pretty quiet here with just this weak circulation moving past Abaco and Grand Bahama towards Florida. We are going to see a little bit of a small increase today in moisture and maybe some showers on the Space and Treasure coasts. But this little circulation here isn't going to really do much. It's this one down in here that is really tough to see that has the chance of developing as it kind of follows in the footsteps of the first one. And if you're a meteorologist like me, these things make you cringe because you know that they can develop pretty quickly over warm water, but you also know that nothing is guaranteed. And I love to try to guarantee things, but I just don't have the power to do that. Here's a rest of the look at the Atlantic. Pretty quiet across the northwest Atlantic. We've got a large area of high pressure aloft building in here. That's going to lead to several days of hot weather, especially on the northern part of the ridge where we lose the influence of the Atlantic. But we also see kind of this ring of fire pattern where we've had waves of showers and storms move through Michigan into Ontario. Yesterday, severe weather impacting the Lake Erie region down into the Pittsburgh area. And we even saw a little bit of severe weather into Virginia, West Virginia, and Kentucky. And that's just all due to heating over elevation where we have those clouds forming a little bit faster, forming some more robust updrafts and thunderstorms. But that's a non-tropical process. That is just a typical summertime pattern here. You see this flare up here east of Trinidad, not looking like it's going to develop into anything, but we will see some heavy rain moving in here. Same for northeastern Venezuela. That's going to move westward, but there's actually this upper level low in here that's kind of spawning that. That's producing a lot of wind shear, but maybe a little bit of enhancement in rain. And then the rest of the tropics right now, there is the monsoon trough in here, but nothing getting north of 10 north. So nothing that's going to develop at this time. And then finally across the eastern Atlantic, we do see thunderstorm complexes moving off, but still too soon to see anything happen. A few weeks ago, if you had asked me, I would have said something probably would have formed out here, but right now, we haven't gotten to the point where the atmosphere has been favorable for that. So I kind of jumped the gun and I apologize for that, but we will take it at the same time. This is a look at the GFS model from earlier. I've got a newer one coming in now. The areas in green show us where the clouds and moisture are. The areas in brown and orange show us areas where there's some dry air in the mid levels of the atmosphere. As we move this along, you can see just a ton of moisture here moving through the Western Gulf and through Central America, just very green down in here. Lots of cloud cover, lots of rain. What you also see is dry air kind of moving in here to the southeastern United States. So overall, this pattern is very dry. What'll happen, though, is that this area of high pressure in here is going to shift east, and we're going to see kind of an uptick in moisture here over the weekend across Florida and the southeast. We've got kind of a front and a trough moving through. That splits up our high pressure area and shoves it eastward. And as a result, we're going to see more unsettled weather closer to Florida here as we get through this weekend and into next week. I don't think we see a repeat of what we saw last week because most of our moisture is funneled into the central Gulf region, but we do see an increase in moisture here as this front moves through. Next week, we continue to see moisture heading up into the Gulf states, especially Louisiana on over into the Florida Panhandle. Which is a good thing because this area does need some rain right now. It's been very dry over the last month or so. But obviously, we don't want too much rain either. We don't want the flooding that comes along with that. As we look out a little bit further into early July, the uncertainty level grows, but you can see it stays very moist over the Western Caribbean, the Bahamas, Cuba, Jamaica, and much of the Gulf of Mexico. Nothing organized at this point, but we obviously have to still keep an eye on things as the waters continue to warm. Here's a closer view of things, and we're going to look at features. This is our potential tropical cyclone here. This is tonight, and this is tomorrow. And generally speaking, it's moving northwest and then towards the west into Mexico. But all the moisture comes up into Texas with it. Behind it, we see a level of drying over the central Gulf Coast, and then we see moistening back up here north of the Bahamas. This is our feature that may spin up into a weak system. Doesn't look super organized. It actually doesn't look tropical, kind of looks more subtropical. But you can see it's racing west-northwestward, and today's model has shifted it back down to the south. Yesterday, it turned it up to South Carolina. Today, taking aim at St. Augustine, Ponte Vedra, those areas in northeast Florida. So we're going to see an increase in moisture on Friday, probably a little more rain and wind, but not a big deal, honestly. In fact, it's not even going to be enough rain for a lot of you guys that really want to see it. What that will do, though, is kind of get shunted here as our trough moves down this weekend. Here's our next piece of energy over the Western Gulf. And the GFS is coming into line with other models showing that whatever does form in the Western Gulf over the weekend is going to stay pretty disorganized and probably lower in intensity. We may get Beryl out of it, assuming we don't get Alberto here, but I don't think it's going to be a strong storm at this juncture. That may drift into Mexico, or it may try to split and form another circulation that goes up towards Louisiana towards the middle of next week. Again, too soon to make that call at this point. If we go to the latest model run, it's actually slightly different, but kind of the same general idea. Same, but different, right? But you can see our low pressure system here heading towards Mexico, moving in tomorrow or Thursday morning as maybe a tropical storm. Here's the next wave that comes up into the southern Gulf and tries to develop into a system Friday night or Saturday morning. This one pretty much follows the exact same path, but you can see it's going to kind of stall near the coast, meaning there'll be a lot more moisture that just keeps streaming in next week into the Yucatan, into western Cuba. And the GFS tries to develop another piece of it and heads it up towards Florida. It's been kind of showing this solution back and forth where something kind of sits in South Texas and Mexico, but then every run or so, or every 3 runs or so, it takes it up towards the northeastern Gulf. I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but what I will say is what I've learned in the month of June, the GFS is often way too aggressive with storm centers once we get past about a week. And this is 240 hours, so 10 days away here later next week. But what I will say is Florida is probably going to head into a wetter pattern again next week. Until our next front drops down and kind of dries things out. So I don't follow this solution here. I know it's got it going into the Outer Banks and right up the Delmarva Peninsula, but it takes an idea and runs with it, and we all know that that's, at this point, not super likely to happen. All right, so here's a look at the European. Interesting. Probability of a depression is pretty high here, probably a storm as well, up until about Thursday evening. And then we see a lower risk than a few days ago east of the Bahamas here, Thursday into Friday. In fact, it pretty much dies, and we don't even see a depression hitting Florida, according to the European Ensemble. What it does show, though, is a second area coming into the Bay of Campeche. with almost as good a chance as what we're dealing with now to form on Saturday and Sunday and kind of head in the same general direction. It's got thunderstorms down here, tries to spin them into a depression. The European ensemble struggles with this, by the way. It's probably not going to happen that way. But you can see overall next week, no solutions showing anything heading up towards Florida. So the European says it's not going to happen. Here's a look at individual ensemble members. This is Alberto, our first system, potentially, still not there yet. And landfall here by Thursday evening. Then we get a break, and then here comes the next piece of energy Friday night. This is 7 o'clock Central Friday night. Same exact area. You see all these lows generally moving northwestward and hitting northeastern Mexico or deep south Texas here on Sunday night, with one or two solutions kind of lingering a little bit farther into Monday of next week. But again, nothing showing a hurricane, nothing turning northeast, everything going in the same general area, the western and southwestern Gulf of Mexico, which will get sick of rain in about a week or so. So that's what we're looking at here on the European ensembles. Here is the other disturbance that we're going to see a plane flying into here. I believe this afternoon is our first flight. And you can see the European says you may not want to even fly out here because there's not much to look at. We're looking at something, but look at how high these pressures are, 1,014 millibars, really not much to look at. And we've got some ensembles that by Thursday night, Friday morning, even kill the system off totally. So there's nothing left by Friday night on the European. The GFS is a little more aggressive. It completely killed it in the last run and brought it back just a little bit here in the last run, but something tells me that they're going to fly into this once and say, you know what, there'll be some moisture, there'll be a swirl, but that's about it. Not a whole lot to get too excited about. All right, so we're going to look at potential Tropical Cyclone 1. Again, don't get too focused on the exact track. This is going to be a big rainmaker with some coastal flooding and some gusty winds. The official Hurricane Center track takes it into northeastern Mexico later tomorrow night, right around midnight, and then kills it on Thursday over the mountainous Sierra Madre of Mexico. The area of tropical storm winds, though, is well north and east, and as a result, you see we do have a tropical storm warning from the U.S.-Mexico border up to Port O'Connor, which is right on the center of the Texas coast. Texas has a large coast, so this is a very large area that is under that tropical storm warning. Still a tropical storm watch, though, for northeast Mexico. I do think that does get upgraded to a warning as soon as the government of Mexico makes that call here. A watch means that we may potentially see tropical storm wind conditions somewhere in the area, generally within 48 hours. A tropical storm warning says it is likely to happen within 36 hours. So we're looking at Wednesday as being our time frame for seeing the strongest amount of wind. The official forecast keeps this a tropical storm. It eventually develops it and gives it a name sometime tonight. And wind speeds generally about 50 miles per hour with some potential upside to that, but it's going to have to get together pretty quickly. Most likely, we're going to see these tropical storm winds affecting the coast later in the day tomorrow into tomorrow night and then very quickly dying off. But there's a possibility that the winds could start getting up to that point here by 8 a.m. tomorrow morning. Here's a look at our chances for tropical storms, winds. And you will see here, not a great chance inland. Oops. Sorry about that. I jumped the gun here. But potentially, we're getting into a 10% chance at the coast here tomorrow afternoon, and then up to a 20 to 30% chance late tomorrow, and then 30 to 40% chance tomorrow night. The 50% chance, or 50 knot winds at 58 miles per hour, those chances are just 5 to 10%. And there's nothing here when it comes to hurricane force conditions. So right now, we're not expecting hurricane conditions at this point, but we are going to see an increase in storm surge well north and east of the center, by the way, from Sargent, Texas, up through Galveston Bay, all the way up close to Houston, all the way to Sabine Pass, 1 to 3 feet over to Vermilion, Cameron Parish, near the Lacassine and Rockefeller refuges here, and then all the way down to the mouth of the Rio Grande. So all the storm surge well north and east of our center. A lot of the rain as well. We have a moderate risk for flash flooding overnight and especially tomorrow here, including San Antonio, Corpus Christi, just south of Houston, the Bolivar Peninsula. And I'm most concerned about the Texas coastal bend here around Port O'Connor and Port Lavaca, Texas. You can see rain totals 6 to 8 inches, the official forecast, but a few spots may pick up about a foot. Here's our model guidance in good agreement for the most part that this makes a western bend tomorrow and heads westward. it'll die before it gets here, but for whatever reason, the model keeps it going. Wind speeds right now about 40 miles per hour, may potentially get to 50 to 60 at its peak. The spread is not high, which is good, but there is spread. And then by the time it moves ashore on Thursday morning, it is beginning to weaken. Here's a look at the HAFS tropical model showing a very broad circulation, pressure slowly falling down to 990 millibars, and then kind of peaking at 987, which is a stronger tropical storm. In my opinion, this is probably going to end up being weaker than what this model is showing, but you can see it's not showing any kind of rapid intensification, so we're good with that. Wind speeds north and east are going to be getting gusty here this afternoon, 30 to 40 miles per hour near the coast. Stronger winds overnight tonight and tomorrow with rain and bands of thunderstorms, and a moderate risk for some locally strong winds and some power outages. We may even see an isolated water spout or tornado somewhere in here. This is the NAM model, so it does try to get a little aggressive, but generally speaking, we're looking at gusts of 40 to 60 miles per hour coming into South Texas here, right on through tomorrow night, and then winds fading as we get to Thursday morning. Farther north gets a little windy in Louisiana as well, but only really at the coast. Inland, we're not looking at humidity that's too much, or wind speeds that are too much. Rainfall, though, a bigger deal here, potentially on the NAM model, close to a foot of rain coming into the Corpus Christi area here in the next 24 hours, and maybe as much as 20 inches of rain as we get to Thursday morning. So somebody in here has got the potential to get crushed with heavy rain, kind of like what we saw in Florida a couple of weeks or last week. But really tough to say exactly where that band's going to be. This model shows it over Corpus. It also shows heavy rains down across Harlingen and Reynosa and Matamoros and McAllen and Weslaco, Texas. But again, tough to say exactly where that's going to fall. The HER model shows it as well, but in a different spot. It shows it north of Corpus, right into the bend here, 6 to 10 inches of rain, also down across deep South Texas. So again, a tricky forecast at this point. Farther up the coast, we're also going to have some heavy rain, but right now, backing off on what happens at Houston over the next couple of days, generally speaking, an inch or less. New Orleans actually could see a couple of inches with these coastal bands that come in. The HER model says kind of the same deal, but more for Houston than what the NAM shows. Maybe an inch in Harris County, but you get south and west towards Freeport, and we're talking 7 inches. Parts of southwest Louisiana, a couple of inches. Parts of the mouth of the Pearl River area near New Orleans over to Slidell could see a couple of inches of rain here as well. The blend of all the models shows us pretty well as well. You see this surge of moisture. We're blending everything together, so there's just a lot of spread in where the heavy rain could fall. But the bad news is that after this system moves out, we've got another pulse of moisture that moves in next week, and some places have the potential to see well over a foot of rain. You can see the blend here in Louisiana as well. I don't know why this changed time steps. It just threw me off, but you can see here, generally speaking, it's going to get wet, and next week may be worse than this week across Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. Generally speaking, 3 to 6 inches along and south of I-10. And finally, we look at Florida. Here's that little bit of a piece of energy that moves in here today. Not a lot of rain, but it does get wet on the Treasure Coast and eventually the Space Coast. But as we head towards the weekend, more moisture coming up here, not from our potential disturbance, but just generally speaking from a switch in direction from easterly to southerly that sends more of that moisture up from the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the rest of the basin. You can see lots of rain over the Western Gulf, even more here on the Pacific side, potentially 2 to 3 feet of rain continuing on top of what we've already seen near El Salvador, Guatemala, and far southern Mexico. And all that moisture continues to build northward, and the Yucatan may get crushed. Western Cuba could get crushed. The Caymans are going to start getting wet. The Eastern Caribbean, though, isn't going to be too bad until we get down closer to the South American coast. Real quick, the U.S. is still going to see active weather here across the plains, flooding potential in here as well. Severe weather threat actually climbs into Canada here the next couple of days, and here's our feed of moisture. And what I will say about this feed of moisture is because of these clouds are moving along this ridge of high pressure here into the northeast, our forecast temperatures have come down just a little bit. The clouds are going to hold it back a little, but not the humidity. It's still going to feel miserable for those of you across this area here in the next few days, peaking Thursday, it looks like. But yeah, very dynamic pattern. I was looking yesterday in Montana. We had a winter storm warning in the west and a severe thunderstorm watch in the southeast. Flood threat continues up here across the prairies region. Kansas, and then, of course, deep South Texas. Take a look at these heat watches and advisories. The advisories are in orange. The heat watches are in red for Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. And the heat warnings are in pink for today and tomorrow around Detroit, Fort Wayne, into northwestern parts of Indiana. Severe weather risk is mainly limited today to the plains, but it continues up into northwest Ontario. There's a chance for tornadoes and severe wind. A very challenging forecast. Yesterday, we didn't quite see it happen down in here like it looked like it would. Everything actually kind of avoided most of our slight risk area, but we do have that slight risk. Tomorrow, the chance does drop off into a marginal risk. Doesn't mean there won't be severe weather, but the chances are, generally speaking, less. And then just a general area of thunderstorms Thursday. It may pick up again on Friday. The area that got hit yesterday, surprisingly, is going to get it again today. Ohio, eastern Michigan, lower Ontario, upstate New York, western and central PA. Marginal risk right now for severe weather. Less of a chance tomorrow. And then Thursday, we target New England and upstate New York. And this will also include the maritime provinces, at least New Brunswick and Quebec, and southeastern portions of Ontario. As we look farther out here, and I'm going to wrap this up very quickly, we see this front is going to drop down from the Great Lakes and cool things down Friday and Saturday. This high pressure that drops it down is a little bit stronger than modeled before. So for those of you in New England, you're going to get very hot, but it is going to cool off quicker than what models were showing a couple of days ago. Our next system moves into the plains. We see severe weather Friday night and Saturday. We may see a big outbreak across portions of southeastern Canada and upstate New York and New England here over the weekend. But again, this is just one model. And then we cool off for a couple days before the next push of heat gets in here later next week. So what we're looking at temperature-wise, upper 90s in Manchester, maybe close to 100. The all-time is 103. So the models have come down just a couple degrees, but they're showing another wave of heat sometime next week. Boston, fortunately, the ocean keeps us a little cooler, but 92 here. Maybe for that championship parade, it's going to be nasty before we cool into the 60s this weekend. And Buffalo is still very warm, with the hottest day likely to be Sunday when that front is moving through. Then we cool down next week. Triple-digit heat possible around Philly, New Jersey. Definitely down around Maryland and the DMV area. We're going to see upper 90s later this week, up into the lower 100s by the end of the weekend. And then that heat temporarily drops off before it builds back in here heading into the month of July. Looking at Canada here, this is Toronto, and we're seeing close to low 90s Fahrenheit, 33 Celsius today, 32 tomorrow, and then heats back up next week before cooling off. Montreal, same deal here, up to 33. And even Moncton, New Brunswick, 34 degrees here on Thursday for a high. That's about 94 degrees Fahrenheit. That is going to be nasty before things cool off this weekend. I wish I had more time, but we got to get rolling. I hope you all have a wonderful day. As always, I give all the glory and all the credit to God, who gives me this gift to be able to share with you all severe weather. And it's tough for somebody who may not be a believer to understand, and you may have resentment towards people that are Christians, and I totally understand. I was there. But what I can say is not necessarily that everybody's got to believe what I believe, but once I believed what I believed, my life changed, and it has gotten so much better. I was renewed. 2 Corinthians 5:17 and 18 says that, therefore, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all things are become new. And all things are of God, who hath reconciled us to himself by Jesus Christ, and hath given to us the ministry of reconciliation. And the important part of that is the ministry of reconciliation. Before I became a believer and a Christian, I struggled mightily with how much I was worth, what my hope was in, what I believed would happen at the end of my life. But knowing that I could accept Jesus as my Savior, as many have, that I'd be reconciled one day and that I could live eternally is what changed me. I pray that you are in that same boat and that you've been changed and your spirit has changed. If you haven't, I'm not going to judge you on it. I just know that the Lord has done so many good things in my life. And no matter what struggles I go through, they're going to be worth it in the end. I pray that you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you all again tomorrow morning. God bless you.